It started as a simple family photo, the kind you would expect from the late 1800s. It arrived at the Philadelphia Historical Society in an old leather folder donated by an older woman who had been cleaning out her grandmother's attic. Most of what she brought in was routine paperwork and faded receipts. Only one picture stood out, not because it was striking, but because it looked like any other studio portrait from the time. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a researcher who focuses on African American history after the Civil War, barely gave the picture a second glance at first. It looked like countless others she had seen from 1868. The usual formal poses, the stiff expressions, the careful clothing. But something made her stop and look again. The family in the picture included 5 people. A man in a dark suit stood with his hand resting on a woman's shoulder. She wore a dress with a lace collar. In front of them stood 3 children dressed in their best clothes. The painted studio backdrop showed columns and draped fabric, the standard look for that era. Sarah raised her magnifying glass to study their faces. The father appeared calm and proud. The mother had a gentle look in her eyes. The 2 older children stared straight into the camera, the way people had to when long exposures made smiling difficult. But the youngest child, a boy around 6, was different. He was not looking at the camera at all. His gaze was focused on something off to the right. His expression was hard to name. It was not fear or curiosity. It felt intentional, as though he knew something. Sarah leaned closer. The photo was in unusually good shape for its age. The studio name was faintly printed in the corner. Whitman and Son Photography, Ray Street, Philadelphia. She made a note to look up the studio later, then turned her attention back to the little boy. It struck her as strange. Families saved for months to afford portraits. Children were coached on how to stand still and look forward. Yet, this boy was clearly looking somewhere else. She checked every inch of the image. Behind the family, next to the draped fabric, something reflected the light in an odd way. It looked like part of a mirror. Photographers in 1868 sometimes used mirrors to add light, but this reflection felt accidental. A strip of glass seemed to be catching light from behind the curtain, and in that reflection, she could see the blurred shape of someone who was not supposed to be in the picture. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her digital scanner. Something was hidden here, and that little boy might have been the only one who saw it. The next morning, Sarah looked up the donation records. The woman who brought in the folder was named Dorothy Peterson, and she had left a phone number. When she picked up, her voice was warm but tired. Sarah explained she was calling about the photograph and asked if Dorothy knew the family. Dorothy paused before answering. They were her great-great-grandparents, Thomas and Martha Williams and their children, Thomas Jr., Clara, and the youngest, Samuel. Samuel, she added, was her great-grandfather. He lived to be 93 and stayed sharp all his life. She spoke of him with affection. Sarah asked if they could meet. She said she had questions and believed the picture might hold historical value. Dorothy's tone shifted. She asked what Sarah had found. Sarah said she wasn't entirely sure yet, but believed Samuel had seen something that had been hidden on purpose. Silence followed. Then Dorothy said her great-grandfather once told her the photo was taken on the most dangerous day of his life. She had been a child when he said it and assumed he was exaggerating. But he insisted that the picture prove his family had done something brave, even if no one could ever know. They arranged to meet the next day. Sarah spent the rest of the day researching the Williams family. Records showed Thomas worked as a blacksmith and Martha as a seamstress. They owned their home, which was rare for a black family just 3 years after the Civil War. The older children attended a respected school. Samuel, at 6, was likely still at home. But a newspaper clipping from July 1868 stopped her cold. It mentioned that a black family had been questioned after accusations of harboring, though nothing was found and no charges were filed. The language was dismissive and biased, but the meaning was clear. Someone had reported the Williams family for suspicious activity. Sarah knew the history. Even after the war and the end of slavery, some people in remote areas of the South were still being held illegally. Former Underground Railroad networks kept working in secret, helping people reach real freedom, often in Canada. Sarah realized the Williams family may have been part of that hidden network. and the photo, of all things, might have captured proof of it. The next morning, Sarah visited the old photography studio location on Race Street. It was now a cafe. After chatting with a barista and offering a small tip for help, she was allowed to explore the basement. She found 3 wooden crates labeled Whitman Archives. Inside were glass negatives, ledgers, and business records from the 1860s and 1870s. She searched the ledger until she found the entry for July 23, 1868. The Williams family had booked a full portrait session that night. That alone was unusual since studios relied on daylight. Evening sessions were rare and noted as special arrangement. Other families with evening sessions stood out as well. Many of them, Sarah realized, had connections to abolitionist work or had been questioned by authorities. These were not casual portrait appointments. These were people who had helped others escape. They were creating proof of their standing and their good name in case they were accused of wrongdoing. In the margin next to some entries, including the Williams families, she found the initials RM along with notes about usual precautions. In one ledger, an assistant had written that RM departed successfully via back entrance. Package secured. Package was the cold term used at the time for a person being moved toward freedom. Back at the Historical Society, Sarah scanned the Williams photo at high resolution. She zoomed in on the mirror behind the curtain. At first, the reflection was just a blur, but with careful adjustments, a human shape began to appear. A figure standing behind the photographer, slightly off to the side. Sarah thought it might be a young woman. Her clothing looked plain, her posture tense, her hands held close to her chest. It became clear. The Williams family had booked the studio at night, so the streets would be quiet. They dressed well, posed for a respectable family photo, and created a record that would protect them. And hidden behind the curtain was someone who needed to avoid being seen, someone they were helping move to safety. Young Samuel had been looking directly at her. Sarah checked the dates again. The investigation had taken place in July. The family portrait was taken on July 23rd. The timing matched too perfectly. The photo served 2 purposes at once, a public image and a hidden truth. She studied Samuel's expression again. His gaze was steady and purposeful. His mouth had the faintest hint of a knowing look. He was watching the woman, making sure she was all right, playing a small but real part in keeping her safe. The next day, Dorothy arrived, carrying a worn cloth bag. She listened quietly while Sarah laid out the enhanced images, the notes from the studio, and the newspaper clipping. Dorothy touched the photograph, her hand shaking. She said her great-grandfather used to talk about helping people before he started school. He remembered one woman clearly. She stayed in their attic for 3 days. He had brought her food and heard her hum a soft song. He never forgot. He knew even at 6 that if anyone found out, his family could be ruined. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. Sarah showed Dorothy a passenger list for a ship that left for Nova Scotia in late July 1868. A woman identified only as RM was listed. Her trip had been paid by a private group. The ship arrived safely, and after that, she disappeared into Canada. To Sarah, that meant she likely made it. Dorothy wiped her eyes. She said her great-grandfather always believed regular people could do brave things without seeking attention. Then she pulled an old journal from her bag. It had belonged to Samuel. On the first page, in his careful handwriting, he had written a message for his grandchildren, so they would know what their family stood for. That evening, Sarah read the journal slowly by lamplight, careful not to damage its fragile pages. Samuel's handwriting was neat and confident, the writing of a man who had lived through enormous change, from the years right after slavery to the rise of jazz. Most pages described everyday life, things like family meals, work, and church. But scattered between those entries were moments that made Sarah stop. From August 12, 1923, he wrote, "It has been 55 years since the photograph. Every July I think of her again. I was only 6, but I remember her face as if I saw her yesterday. She was scared and strong at the same time. Mother later told me she walked nearly 90 miles to get to Philadelphia. She followed the stars and trusted instructions whispered by people she never knew. She stayed in our attic for 3 days, and I would sneak her bread and water, pretending I was on a secret mission. She thanked me once and called me her little guardian. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew we were helping her hide. I knew telling anyone would hurt my family. Sarah turned more pages and found another entry from 1931. A young man came by asking questions about the years after the war. He said he was a historian trying to understand how the railroad worked in Philadelphia. I told him what most people say, that it was brave work, but that many details are gone. I did not mention the photograph. I did not mention R.M., Rachel Martin, though I did not know her full name until 1889, when she wrote to Mother from Toronto. By then I was grown with children of my own. Reading that letter, knowing she survived and made a life in freedom, brought me to tears. Mother saved her letter. I hope my daughter saves it too. Maybe someday someone will read it and understand what ordinary families did long ago. Sarah wrote down the name Rachel Martin, her hand slightly shaking. She continued reading. From July 23, 1935, 67 years ago today, we took that picture. I'm 81 now, the last one alive from that room. Thomas Jr. passed in 1918, Clara in 1929. Mother and father have been gone for decades. The photographer, Mr. Whitman's son, died last year. His grandson asked if I knew him. I said only as a customer. But the truth is, Mr. Whitman Jr. was as brave as any of us. He opened his studio at night, so families like ours could quietly do our part. He pretended not to see when someone extra slipped through the back door. He took portraits that were alibis and, maybe by choice or maybe by chance, left reflections that told a real story. I wonder if he knew the mirror caught her. I hope he did. Maybe that photograph was his way of saying it happened. These people helped, and one day someone will notice. The final entry linked to the story was written shortly before Samuel died in 1961. I told my great-granddaughter Dorothy about the photograph today. She's 10, smart and full of life, and she asked why people in old pictures never smiled. I told her we were not serious. We were brave. I told her the picture was taken on the most dangerous day of my life, and that it proved my family helped someone, even if no one could ever know. She looked puzzled. Maybe I rambled, but I want her to understand someday. The world holds together because ordinary people choose to do what's right. Families opening their doors quietly. Photographers dimming their lights so someone can leave unseen. A 6-year-old boy keeping a secret that could destroy everything. The photograph is in my daughter's drawer now. I hope it lasts. I hope someone finds it. I hope the mirror speaks. Sarah closed the journal with tears running down her face. Samuel had hoped someone would understand, and now, almost 160 years later, someone finally did. Sarah struggled to trace Rachel Martin until a historian found her under the name Rachel Morrison. Rachel reached Canada, built a life, and later thanked the Williams family in a note. Sarah's research revealed more families who quietly helped others to freedom, their portraits hiding proof of courage in plain sight.